So for wrapping a wooden handle, for doing a leather wrap, first you got your tools list here. I got a Dremel. I use this with a sanding bit, sanding drum for skiving the edge of the leather. You can also use, various X-Actos, or if you had a skiving tool, which I don't. Scissors, I have to cut some stuff open. We have your riser material. In this case, I'm using some leather lace, something to cut that I can put some nice straight edges on when I'm cutting that. Of course, pencil and ruler, used as you would expect for measuring and drawing stuff. Here's the wood core that I've already shaped and got ready to go for the cord under wrap. The leather for afterwards to wrap over that. This is the cording that I'm going to use for that under wrap, and it's also the cord that I'll end up using to imprint the tooling marks in the leather once it's wrapped around the wood core. You can use different stuff, underneath or over top, depending on the size of what you want to have for the tooling marks. I usually like to go with thinner underneath because I don't want to try to deviate too far from the original shape, but that's because I've come close to the finished shape when I've created my core, right? The thicker you use underneath, the larger overall. And then of course some glue. I've got some 5-minute epoxy, some super glue, stir sticks, in this case toothpicks. A quick overview of what you're going to need to have handy to do the work. Okay, so first what you want to do is take your core and mark off where you want your risers. In this case, I'm going to be putting one riser just in from the top and bottom edge. So let's say that we want to go, I'm going to go 1/4 inch in. Let's see here. Make a couple marks. And I'm not going to video myself doing this all the way around. This is pretty self-explanatory stuff. I'm giving myself some marks so that I can make a line around this to use as a reference point for when I wrap the leather riser. Right, so we've got our lines here giving us the reference point, and now we're going to go ahead and just cut some leather for the risers. I like to make, doesn't have to be exact yet. We'll trim up the end and we need to. For now, we're just getting a good estimate. Keep an eye on our spot. Make our initial cut. And our lower guy, again, just getting an idea of what is going to be enough, maybe a little extra so we have a little room to trim. And in this case, I like to start with some crazy glue to set it in place. And then as I go around, bit by bit, I do more crazy glue. So, get out of the way. You can see there's our, see if that's on the camera at all, yeah. You don't get a lot of time with the crazy glue, as you know, it's fast drying. So get it right, or use a slower drying glue. I usually use crazy glue for the risers, and when I'm starting to glue down the under wrap, looks good. I'm just doing a test wrap, seeing if it's going to look even all the way around. Kind of eyeball it. Sure it's going to make sense. Yeah. And then just continue along gluing. I don't like to have too much glue on at once because you can get a little sloppy and make things a little uneven if you're not watching what you're doing. And you'd be surprised how easily a small error here in a riser can can translate to the finished piece. It's going to show up. Little deviation here does translate when it's all under leather. So try to get it right. It's pretty good. Y'all. Now I'm going to hold this to dry just a little bit here, and you can see us. See if I can get it on the camera. Got some overlap. I'll just take my X-Acto and carefully cut off that overlap. I'm off camera with my cutting, sorry. Good. A little more glue. Get that down and tight. It's good. Once I've done that, just to hold it in place nicely, I like to take the crazy glue and go around the riser. Maybe hit the seam once. Kind of just lock it up. There you go. It's one riser in spot. I'll repeat for the bottom side. Again, not going to video that because if you didn't see what I was doing the first time, just back up the tape a little bit and start over again. Right, so the risers are on and we're ready to begin wrapping with cord. Similarly to how we first set the riser, you want to, in my case, I use a little bit of crazy glue to spot this. This part can be a little annoying in that you just want to make sure that it's held in place right. And tight to it to start with. You know, make sure your glue is held up, firmed up, dried, whatever you want to call it, before you get going wrapping. And the rest kind of begins to just write itself. I like to do nice, try to keep it tight. The purpose of this is to help hold everything together, increase the strength of the wood core, and therefore the grip overall. So you're not talking about crazy tension, but you want it tight the whole time. And I'm just going to continue with this piece. Typically I like to make sure that I'm working with a long enough length that I can do the whole thing in one roll. I don't want to have to stop halfway and glue on a new piece. It's just going to, you know, it's counterproductive to the idea of wrapping it in a single line of cord. If it happens, it happens, but you know, I like to work from a big bundle. If I know I've got a long strip from whatever, that's going to be good enough. I'll use it. Anyway, again, you're not going to watch me wrap this whole thing. You'll just tune back in once this is done. See, I should have mentioned here, as I'm going here, you notice that I started on the more narrow side. This is something that's mentioned in some other tutorials, Brenno's for example. It just makes sense. You want to make sure if you start on the narrow side and you wrap, everything will stay tighter. If you start at the wide point and wrap, your wrap's going to have a tendency to want to slip to the narrowest spot. Now, of course, I mean, this has a bit of a curve on both ends, but generally speaking, one side will always be more narrow than the other. Begin there with any wrapping that you're doing. It just makes sense to keep everything as tight as can be and held in place properly during the wrapping. Another thing you can do when you're at that, when you're at a midpoint, say where it's starting to narrow again, and something that you'll do eventually anyway, is, fasten things down with a little bit of glue. It doesn't have to be everywhere here, but what I like to do is run a couple lines of the glue across things. Hopefully not on my fingers too much. Just to sort of set things in place and hold it up. I mean, that's also useful if you get stuck halfway through and have to stop instead of losing your work. When I'm done wrapping the whole thing, I will again just run a couple of lines, maybe one on each side and end, to keep it all in place a little bit. All right, so here I'm at the end. I've come all the way around. At this point, as this bit of cord ends up in here, it's going to finally hit its tightest spot. I'm going to just hold it in place and glue it down. Come on. And trim off the end. Nothing fancy. Don't want it overlapping too much, because again, that can show up under the leather. Give that a second to tighten. Take my X-Acto and try to cut it clean. When you're doing this, be careful not to cut anything else but the last bit off. If you need to tuck that in again, be careful. Maybe use something that's pointy but not too sharp. Get it tucked away. That's good. And then, like I was saying before, a little bit of glue in some spots to firm things up. That bottle's done. I prefer these tiny bottles of Crazy Glue because this stuff dries out half the time before you get to it again. It's fast, it's used, it's done. So, next up is going to be doing the ends. I'm not sure if other people do the ends, but I do. More of the same. Get your cord. Start with a nice piece here. I'm going to glue it down. The ends can be a little bit annoying. This part here, it can be a little bit annoying to get it to hold in place just because you've got a little bit, not too much room to work with. I'm going to have shiny thumbs after tonight. Here we're getting a lot of bump just from where I left it, so I want to trying to eliminate. It's hard to see with the shadows there. I had a lot of bump as it came wrapped around. It went up quite a bit over the first layer, so I'm just trying to force it into place a little better. Let it dry properly. And yeah, I'm not going to get many wraps around here, but I don't know. Perhaps not totally necessary on the ends here. I suppose more of habit to do this than anything else. Just what I've always ended up doing. Yeah, so that's the last wrap I'll get around that. I'll just cut the end off, glue it all down, and repeat for the bottom. Quick shot, close-up of the finished underwrap. You can see it all the way to the ends. You can see the glue lines, just kind of keeping everything in place a little better. The riser height is slight on this one. Now, I use different, varying heights. I've been finding lately that I'm kind of starting to prefer the lower height on the riser here, just enough that your finger can find it and the side of your hand can find it when you're gripping, but not so much that it's a bother. Say if you're coming over the grip, if you can imagine the cross here and you want to come over, it's not going to bother you. But again, it's personal preference. What you feel like. This is enough, you're going to see it when you're making with the rest of the wrap. Anyway, on to the next, which is fitting the leather, cutting, skiving, the leather and wrapping the grip.